I can feel it when there's a presence somewhere. There's a palpable sense of being watched. There's a tension and paranoia in the air that lingers and can even simmer into full-blown terror. It makes you feel very vulnerable. When I was a younger child, I remember seeing glowing red eyes hanging in the air in my dark living room. I thought our house had werewolves or vampires. There was a phase in 3rd grade when glowing orbs would hang out in my room for several minutes at a time, which I interpreted as aliens. My child mind was trying to make sense of things, but I definitely had a fear of the dark, specifically in our house. Most places were fine in the dark, but in our house, I always felt like I was being watched by something with malicious or, at best, neutral intentions. Paranormal things ramped up for me in high school, but to remain chronological, I had a cousin stay at our house one summer while most of us were on vacation between my 7th, 8th grades. My cousin Billy was helping my dad with various projects. One night, my cousin was going to bed in one bedroom, later dubbed the spooky room. Outside in the dark, he saw a figure leave our garage and entire our house. My dad, right? Billy, 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 help me. My cousin heard my father shouting. Billy rushed to check on my father. My father had been sleeping and was irritated by Billy's presence. Billy went back to bed, only to hear it again. Billy, 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 help, help, help. Again, cousin Billy rushed to check on my father, who was fine and confused by Billy's urgency. Billy slept on the couch that night. I didn't learn about this until years later. A couple years later, my brother moves away to college, and I move into his old bedroom. It's my freshman year of high school. I was always particularly creeped out by this room, but hey, new changes are often intimidating. One morning, I wake up to see a skull perfectly drawn on the dust on the window across from where my head lies when I sleep. This was the layer of dust facing the inside of the room, not the outside. No one had access to the room except me and my parents, who are not pranksters by any means. I show my mum and wipe it away. A couple weeks later, I'm studying in that bedroom. It's night and the lights are on, so the windows turn into mirrors. I look up from my bed towards that skull window, and I see in the reflection a white silhouette standing behind me. I hold my gaze for maybe 10 seconds, just trying to grasp what I'm looking at. I eventually turn my head around and see nothing. I look back at the window and see nothing in the reflection. I sleep on the couch for the next few nights. A couple more weeks later, I'm lying in bed, listening to a late-night radio show. Lights are off. Looking through that same skull window, I see a similar white silhouette outside stride past my window. I sleep on the couch for several more nights. Over the course of weeks, I see more things drawn on the dust of the windows. Generally, it's scribbles and shapes. I'm scared they might be some sort of curse or something, so I wipe them away. Out of curiosity, I put a sticky note on the window that says, "Please, right below." Several days later, a perfect circle appears around the note, as if someone had put the base of a paint can up against the surface. This wasn't like the finger drawings I'd seen earlier, but one drawing did really stand out. I decided to recreate it in MS Paint before I wiped it away. Over the years, I've shared this with friends, colleagues, and they mostly come to the same conclusion as I did before I tell them my interpretation. But, yeah, for the majority of high school, I slept with the light on. I avoided that side of the house like the plague. Little things here and there, but nothing huge. Until it's senior year of high school. I'm in the living room with my mother watching TV, and the clothes dryer finishes. This dryer is directly down the hallway from the spooky room. I suck it up, and head over to empty the machine, getting my usual feeling of immense dread, paranoia as I enter that side of the house. I bend over and start unloading the laundry, and my mind goes blank, and I lose control over my motor functions. My arms go limp, and, beyond my control, my body stands up, and I hear a masculine voice take a deep breath and hiss in my ear. I immediately regain control of my body, and I GTFO. Around that time period, my aunt comes to stay with us for a month or two. She has no idea what I've experienced there. But literally, on her first day there, the bathroom door slams hard on her, and she immediately has us smudge the house to ward off whatever's there. I've experienced other paranormal things elsewhere, and I've had a couple weird experiences where I think my dead relative warned me about a couple imminent deaths in the family. I spent my childhood, until I was 9, in McLean, Virginia, suburbs of Washington, D.C. I lived there with my parents and 3 siblings who were much older until they had all moved out by the time I was around 6. The house was a single level with a large finished basement. I had various paranormal experiences as a child. The most common was a woman's voice randomly saying my name, even when my parents were out in the yard and I was alone in the house. It was never threatening, just a woman with normal voice calmly saying my name. Though of course it scared the hell out of me. The other experience I had was really creepy. Sometimes if I woke up in the middle of night, a scene would be playing on my bedroom wall, always the same scene. An old-fashioned horse and buggy pulling up, and a woman getting out. It was faded and jittery, like it was being playing on an old projector, and had a sort of strobe effect. Always the same scene, and then it would just stop and the room would go dark again. The last experience I had was the scariest and thankfully the last. It was the week my family was getting ready to move. My aunt and uncle had come down to help, and I was playing hide and seek with my cousins. I hid in a downstairs closet. The last thing I remember is a sensation of hands around my neck strangling me. The next thing I remember is my cousins standing over me screaming for help. My parents rushed me to the emergency room. They checked me over and could find nothing wrong. The doctor concluded I had suffered an asthma attack, though I had no history of asthma before or after that one event. So we move into a newly built and absolutely the most unhaunted house in existence, and over the years I just chalked my experiences up to an overactive childhood imagination. Fast forward 10 years, I'm now a freshman in college, and my brothers and sisters are all in for Thanksgiving. Conversation turns to the old house in McLean, and my sister says, "I never was so happy as the day I got married and moved out of that haunted hellhole." This is the first I had ever heard any of my family say they had similar experiences. So for the first time ever, we began comparing notes. My sister told us about seeing a woman in white dress on several occasions. In one instance, she was laying in bed on the phone when she saw a woman walk into her bedroom, stand by the mirror, fidget like she was putting on an earring, then just walk out. My sister said she assumed it was our mum, though mum was always the blue jeans type, so my sister was curious why she was dressing up. So my sister hung up the phone and walked into the kitchen, and mum was just standing at the sink in her blue jeans doing dishes. She asked mum if she was just in her room, and mum said, "No, I've been doing dishes for the last half hour." My brothers seemed embarrassed and wouldn't go into detail about what they saw. They just kind of blew it off by saying, "We say some strange things, but we were smoking a lot of dope at the time." So who knows what was real and what wasn't? Likewise, my mum said we were pretty much all crazy, as she had spent more time in the house than anyone and never saw anything whatsoever. Though my sister told me later that wasn't entirely true, as Mum had told her once when she was much younger about seeing the women in white. She just said that Mum was just so determined that none of them talk about it around me when I was young, and the subject was so off limits that Mum had actually convinced herself it never happened. My dad had perhaps the most bizarre story. He was an electrician and had a workshop in the basement. One day, he was working with his soldering iron, sat it down on the workbench, turned around to pick up a tool, and when he turned back around, it was simply gone. Needless to say, he was a bit worried that a hot soldering iron had fallen somewhere. It might start a fire, so he searched all over for it, but it was simply nowhere to be found. At first he thought one of my brothers was playing a prank, but he realized they couldn't have gotten into the workshop and grabbed it without him seeing, and when he went to check, neither of them were even home. Eventually he just threw his hands up in the air in disbelief and went out and bought another one. Then fast forward several months to Christmas time. The Christmas tree and all the decorations were kept in a closet next to the workshop. During the year, there were boxes piled around the door, so it wasn't even accessible. Dad opens the door and turns on the light, and there lays his soldering iron right on top of the very first box, the cord tightly wound around it and looking like it had been gently sat right where it would be seen. Curiously, this was the exact same closet I had the strangling incident in. Then my dad tells a really scary story. He said that after he and my mum got married and bought the house, and before any of us kids came along, his niece was trying to get a job in DC, so she asked if she could move in until she found a job. He told her sure, and fixed up a bedroom in the basement so she could have some privacy. The first night, he and my mum were awakened to a loud scream. Dad grabbed his gun from the nightstand and rushed downstairs, thinking there must be an intruder. His niece was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face pale white, a look of terror on her face. He tried to get her to say what happened, but she would just shake her head and refuse to talk about it. She absolutely would not go back in the basement and wouldn't even get near the basement door when it was open. She slept upstairs on the couch for 2 days until she could make arrangements to go back home. She wouldn't even go back in the basement to get her belongings. Dad had to pack them up for her. He really never had much contact with her after that, but eventually asked her mother if she ever said what she saw. Her mother claimed that she had seen someone come into the room. She thought it was just my dad coming back after having forgotten to tell her something. But when she sat up to talk, the figure of a man was grinning at her with a swollen, blackened face, eyes swollen shut, covered in blood, and a grinning teeth protruding from shriveled purple lips. After hearing all this, my sister gets curious and did some research. The house was part of a group of houses built by a housing developer in the mid-1920s. At that time, most people lived near where they worked, but he got the idea he could build a housing development for upper-income federal workers who would like to live in a more rural setting and commute to work. This idea was actually about 25 years ahead of its time, as suburbs really didn't exist in the 1920s. He worked out a deal with a contractor. If he built the houses, he could have one of his choice as payment. Unfortunately, when the stock market collapsed, the country went into a depression. Both the developer and the contractor lost everything. The contractor ended up hanging himself in the house he had picked for his own, which, you guessed it, was ours. The house sat empty for several years, and then was bought by a couple with no children. The husband died shortly thereafter, but the wife lived there for the rest of her life until she passed away and my parents purchased it. Reading between the lines, I think the bad spirit in the basement that my dad's niece saw and tried to choke me was the ghost of the contractor that had killed himself in the house. I think the lady in white was harmless, maybe even protective, probably the old lady that had lived there prior to my parents. I also think she was the one that whispered my name. As for the horse and buggy, I don't think that was really even related to the house, just some scene from long before the house was built that replayed over and over. The lady that sold my parents this house warned us of weird things going on, but my Christian parents ignored it and felt we would be fine. At that time, I think they thought it was all bollocks, to be honest. It was a fixer-upper, but definitely a great house with lots more space than our first. Anyway, as the weeks went by, things got a bit weirder. I quickly learnt, when playing in the street, that children in my neighbourhood thought my house was haunted, and to be fair, it being an old, tall, Victorian house with a rickety, overgrown Gothic pathway, it was creepy to a kid, and there were many horrible stories about things that happened inside. Kids wouldn't come round and play at my house due to this, and I earned a stigma being the new girl that lives in the haunted house at school. The house was 3 stories high, with banisters running the entire way up and out of where things started dropping from the top of the house to the lower landing through this banister gap. Proper poltergeist shit. Ornaments, vases, dog toys that were never upstairs. Our dogs wouldn't go up the top of the house by the attic. All they would do is bark and whimper at the landing, and I was also absolutely terrified of the entire top floor. I was an only child, and I wouldn't go upstairs when home alone because it frightened me so damn much. All I can describe it as soon as the light wasn't on upstairs, I could feel a presence there with me. An angry, bitter, cold feeling, like a shadow behind me, getting bigger and bigger. I'd sprint as fast as I could downstairs, and strangely, even now more than a decade on, I still have bad dreams about my legs slowing down on the final staircase like I'm running through water and something is chasing me. So anyway, the weird stuff continued. I started knocking on a wall one evening, playing as a kid, and to my delight, it would respond to me, knocking back, responding, and copying my pattern. My mum started absolutely freaking out at this when I showed her, running outside to demand who was doing knocking to her kid all night to find just brick wall and air. No one was on the other side. On Halloween, we all heard a scream from the attic, only to brave checking it out to find it totally vacant and fine. By this point, my parents were spooked. Being religious, they brought a priest in who informed them the upstairs was very negative spiritually, and they should remodel the entirety of it to try and get the spirit out. He told them to gut the attic, bless the area, and ask the spirit to leave. Okie dokie. So they began to remodel the attic into a bedroom, bathroom, etc. This spirit did not like this. At one point my father claims his leg was pulled through the floor, and sure enough his leg went through the floor into the downstairs bathroom ceiling. Later, when we had a guest in a separate part of the house, all of a sudden part of the ceiling fell on his head for absolutely no reason. The builders said it was a complete fluke and didn't make sense. On the last night of converting the attic, I had the worst dream of my life, which I will never forget. My bedroom was en suite, so it had 2 doors, and both were heavy on hinges, like you couldn't open them without pushing down on the handle, just for reference. So this dream. I was watching a man and woman argue. The woman was wearing Victorian clothes and the man was in a gentleman's suit. They were arguing back and forth, and I couldn't make out the words clearly, like I was listening underwater. She suddenly looked at me, straight in the eyes, and started screaming and pointing to the floor. Now, trigger warning, because this was terrifying to see as a kid in a dream and nothing I'd ever seen in any film or TV show at that age. On the floor was a dead baby, face down. I woke up, hyperventilating in my bed, thinking it was all over, when I looked down at my own bedroom floor to see the same dead baby, but it was crying and contorting. The woman slammed open my bathroom door, the one on hinges, and ran across my room and out the other door. Both my doors were literally swinging, which was physically impossible without someone standing doing it, and all I could hear was screams and cries. I screamed and woke again to my mum shouting for me to wake up, saying she could hear a racket of slamming doors upstairs, but when she checked, I was tucked up in bed, just tossing and turning. I told her my dream, and she told me to come sleep with her. Years later, when I was old enough, she admitted to me that they did research on the house after the priest visit and found information that a maid had been pregnant by the housemaster and forced to kill or abort the baby in the attic. My mum, being spiritual but also Christian, said she had tried to make peace with this spirit after learning this.